Well, good evening, everybody. I told Pastor Tammy I'm going to add scholarly to my business card. Right now, it just has my name on it. That's all it says. So I can put a little something on there and make everybody be impressed, I guess. So, can you hear me? Okay, good. I know. You're supposed to chew this thing, so I'm not real good at doing that. But I'll hold it up here like this so you can hear me. So, glad to see everybody tonight. And somebody said to me, Joe, back when we did the breakout classes where it wasn't the whole church, you always used to start the class with a story or something like that. And Nancy's shaking her head already. She knows what's coming. So, and I haven't been doing that. And they said, boy, we miss that. And I went, okay, I'll do it. So I don't remember who it was, but whoever it was that asked for it, this is for you. All right. What do you get when you cross an atheist with a Jehovah's Witness? Somebody that rings your doorbell for no apparent reason. All right. Well, we got a heckler out there already. So, yeah, you don't get the mic tonight at all. So, hey, I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. We're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 44 and 45, the continuing saga of Joseph. When Pastor Tammy first emailed me and said, hey, here's what we want to teach, we secured the date, and she told me you'll be doing Genesis 44 and 45. I said to her, oh, that's cool. Joseph is one of my favorite characters in the Bible. Anybody know why? Because of the name? Oh, you're partially right. No, because when he was young, he was a dork. Right. And he straightened up. I relate very well to the dork part. I don't know about the straightening up, but I relate to the dork part. Right, so, but we're gonna dive into that. But I want to take a moment to kind of go back and review how we get to where we are in chapter 44 and 45, because I think there's a couple of things, and the other folks that were teaching, Dan and Ray and Chuck and the other guys that have been doing the teaching have done a terrific job. I just want to kind of review and make sure that we all have the same foundation of understanding, so that as we delve into this a little deeper, we get a perspective on why things went the way that they did. So I want to go clear back to maybe chapter 33. Don't worry about this, guys. I don't need you to project this. This is just going to be a quick review. I want to go clear back to maybe chapter 33, I believe it was, where Isaac tells Jacob, get yourself a wife from among our people. Now, that was critical because God directed them to do that. That's why Isaac was telling Jacob that. But there is more than just the short-term ramifications of obedience to God that Isaac was telling Jacob that, because the line had to remain pure. Right? The Messiah was coming from the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And all of the cultures surrounding them were pagan. And it was, and if we remember, King David was told, somebody will sit on your throne forever. And of course, that was a prophecy of the Messiah. And the Messiah had to come from a pure line. We didn't want a pagan culture laying claim to the throne. So the line needed to remain pure. And Esau blew it. He didn't marry someone from within the Hebrew nation or the Hebrew people. He married foreigners, and so the Messiah could not come through him. So it was critical that Jacob take a wife from from one of his relatives. As a matter of fact, Isaac said, go to see your uncle Laban, and there'll be somebody over there for you. So we know the story. The servant goes over there, spies out Rachel, comes back, gets Jacob. Jacob goes and he sees Rachel, and it's love at first sight. Anybody ever had an experience like that, love at first sight? Did you really? Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Of course, you're sitting right next to your wife. You're getting points now, buddy. Keep going, man. Yeah, good answer. Yeah. Did I see another hand back there somewhere? Dan, yeah, Ray. Good job. No, okay, yeah. So what we're learning is you're a good salesman. Dan said I had love at first sight, but Carol didn't. So what we're learning is you're a good salesman. All right. So, but anyway, it's love at first sight. And I had a friend was a wonderful man of God. I really enjoy. He's gone home to be with the Lord now, but he went to Bible school, and he didn't wind up being in the ministry, but he went to Bible school. And one of his first days there, he was on an elevator going up to his class, and a girl got on that was in the school, and he thought, oh, she's kind of cute, and he noticed her, but that was it. But he said in his spirit, right then and there, he got the message that this is your wife. You're going to marry her. And so it turned out that she was going to the same class. They became study partners and started dating and did get married. And at the wedding, he told this story about how he knew when he got on that elevator that he had this message in his spirit that was going to be his wife. And his wife took the microphone from him and said, I had the exact same thing happen. So, I've always said, love at first sight is ridiculous. But I think if you're directed by God, that it can happen. So if you're single, hang in there. All right. So anyway, Jacob, love at first sight. And he talks to Laban. They agree that he's going to work for 7 years and then he'll get Rachel. So he works for 7 years. And again, I'm not quite sure of the culture, how that culture works. But I'm assuming they have some type of a wedding ceremony and then the honeymoon. And Jacob wakes up the next morning and guess what? How drunk do you have to be? I mean, the wedding, maybe, they cover them all up pretty good at the wedding. You might not notice, but, the honeymoon, I don't understand that. But anyway, he goes back to Laban and says, hey, you fooled me. And Laban says, oh, well, it's our custom that you get we marry off the oldest one first. And, my response to that would be, well, thanks for telling me that ahead of time, right? But anyway, Jacob works another 7 years to get Rachel. And, he's married to Leah now. And Leah, the other thing that just astounds me is that Leah has to know that Jacob doesn't want her, right? But he's having kids with her, all right? So, that culture back then is interesting, to say the least. So they start having kids and have a family. He works another 7 years. He gets Rachel, works 6 years after that, and they have families. Well, Rachel can't have any kids. And so Rachel becomes very, very disturbed, the fact that she can't have any kids, tells Jacob, hey, go have a kid with one of my servants. Nancy and I were talking about this, I think it was yesterday, and I said, Nancy, if you ever said to me, go have a kid with somebody else, I'd be like, get in the car, we're going to the hospital right now, something really bad has happened in your brain. I don't know what it is, but we better find out. Right? But again, that culture was weird back then. So he has kids with the servant, and eventually Rachel becomes pregnant, and Joseph is born. And, Rachel's the love of Jacob's life, and she produced a son for Jacob, so he's favored. And we see that very, very clearly in the way the family interacts in their reactions. And Joseph gets spoiled. Now, we know Joseph gets spoiled because we read about his coat of many colors. And, back then, lots of bright colors and decorations and ornamentation on clothing was a luxury. That was a very, very expensive to do. So this is the equivalent, I'm probably going to show my age here, but this is the equivalent of Joseph getting a members only jacket and the other brothers get from JCPenney. The brothers are not happy, man. They're the ones out in the field working hard and doing stuff. And Joseph is young. He's not putting in nearly as much effort, but he's getting all the good stuff. And so they're jealous of him. And that's normal reaction that anybody would have in that situation. And so Joseph has to go around parading his coat and showing it off. And then Joseph has a dream that's obvious that it was his brothers bowing down, his whole family bowing down to him, and he has to go tell everybody about the dream. We see, in my opinion, now again, this gospel according to Joe, take it for what it's worth, but we see a very immature Joseph. I don't know if it was because his brothers were rejecting him and he wanted to try to fit in, and he thought, man, maybe if I'm really cool, they'll think I'm cool, they'll like me and accept me. Or maybe it was just that he thought he was better than them and just was going to lord it. I'll teach you to, not include me in with your group, man. I'll be better than you. I think it was one or the other. But anyway, I think Joseph felt left out, and his immaturity caused him to react the way that he did. And it didn't work. So the brothers decide, hey, we got to get rid of Joseph. And they make a plot to kill him. Fortunately, was it Reuben, I believe, that intervened and said, don't kill him, let's do something else with him. So they throw him down a well. And eventually some Egyptian traders come by and they pull him out and sell him to the Egyptian traders into slavery. Now, when somebody throws you down a well, you're pretty much sure that, life is not going to be very good. You're probably going to die. And if you're lucky, you won't die and you'll get pulled back out. But when you're sold into slavery in that culture, slavery was not a very pleasant life. Slaves were chattel. They were property. They were a commodity. And so you didn't take very good care of them because that cost money. If something happened to them, you cast them aside and you go get another one. So the life of a slave was hard and short. So, at this point, Joseph's got to be pretty sure, man, my days on earth are not too long. But this is a critical moment in Joseph's life. Joseph had to go through this to be risen to the level of authority that he had. Because when he winds up in Potiphar's house, we see a different Joseph. We see a more mature Joseph, a guy that Potiphar had demonstrated abilities that led Potiphar to trust him to put him in charge of the whole house. Now, certainly those were God-given abilities. We know God blessed Joseph. But it took a certain maturity to demonstrate them and utilize them properly. And I believe that came to Joseph because he had that near-death experience, let's call it. So to me, one of the lessons that we see as we go through this is, sometimes things happen to us that are not good, that are scary, and we get very, very worried about them. And I would have a tendency when something bad happened to me, I'd look and go, why, God? What did I do? Why is this happening to me? And I have learned that when something happens and it's not very favorable for me, I don't ask why anymore. I ask God, what? What do you want me to learn from this? What do I need to do from this? Where are we going? What do I need to do next? How do I stay in your will and learn from this what I need to learn, or do from this what I need to do? I think that's a sign of maturity. It took me a long, long time to get there. All right, but I think that's as we mature in God, we will learn to do that. All right. So Joseph is in Potiphar's house, and he's in charge of it. And Potiphar's a high official in Egypt, and so Potiphar lives pretty well. And Joseph's living in a nice house, and he basically has run of it. So life is, for a slave, life is pretty good for Joseph. So Joseph is going through, and all of a sudden Potiphar's wife gets all out of control and tries to seduce Joseph. And we know the story there that he resisted, and she falsely accused him, and he winds up in prison. Now, that'll happen to us too. We'll be going through life, and things will be going well, and we'll be, what we feel like we're being very blessed of God, and things are going well. And then all of a sudden, something awful happens that really was, maybe just like Joseph, you're trying to have integrity and be spiritually mature and serve God, and then something bad happens. All right, that happens to everybody. It's the earth. We live in a fallen earth. All right. Now, one thing and Joseph winds up in prison. Really bad place to be. Again, in that culture, in that time, prison was, pretty much a death sentence, without being a death sentence. So, again, those things happen. One thing we see with Joseph's example is his steadfast integrity. He never wavered from God. He didn't blame God for his problems. He didn't turn from God because he had problems. He didn't say, maybe if I adapt to this culture, I'll be more accepted and things will go easier for me. He was steadfast in his commitment to God. And I think there's another important lesson there for us. I think that, I'll hear folks sometimes say to me, well, I quit going to church because of this, this, and this, or I don't serve God anymore because of this, this, and that, because of, something else going on in the culture. There is no excuse. We have an example here in Scripture of someone that, regardless of the wickedly pagan culture that they lived in, remained steadfast to God. It can be done. It can be done, and we need to do that. We need to hang on to God. Because we don't know what the future, Joseph didn't know what the future held, right? But see, one thing that was important for Joseph going into prison was, and he rose to the level of the second in command in the prison. Well, the prison is a political place. People that are in prison are because they've broken the Egyptian laws, or they've upset one of the Egyptian officials. So Joseph was learning about Egyptian law and custom while he was in prison. He was learning about the hierarchy of command and authority, and he was learning about Egyptian politics. That is critical for Joseph when he rises to second in command to Pharaoh. But he wasn't prepared to do that until he learned about how the Egyptian culture worked, and particularly the Egyptian government. So the prison experience was critical for Joseph to be prepared to rise to that position of authority. God was preparing him. Now, we're going to see later on as we get into our scriptures that that Joseph doesn't have the perspective of, well, God did this to me. It's more God allowed this to happen and used it to work together for his good, and it worked for my good too. All right, I think that's an important perspective to keep. So Joseph rises to second in command. He interprets the dream of Pharaoh, rises to second in command. Well, this is good. When I was rehearsing this, it took me almost 25 minutes to explain this. I've done it in 15, so we're doing good. Does anybody have any comments, by the way? If you do have any comments, let me know. We don't have a mic runner tonight, so I will listen to your comment and repeat it so everybody can hear it. Any comments so far about what we've talked about? Okay, good. Either I'm doing a really good job or I've lost you already, one or the other. So, Joseph, yes. Mm. 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 Yeah. Yes. Tony said, I think it's important to know that God knew that he could trust Joseph to hold on to what he knew from childhood. Joseph was dependable. Joseph had integrity, especially in the spiritual matters. And God knew that he was somebody that he could trust to put through what he had to put through, and that he would hang on and remain true to God, even in that pagan culture. All right. So, Joseph now rises to second in command in Egypt. And just as Joseph had interpreted Pharaoh's dreams to say that there were 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, they have the 7 years of plenty. They fill the storehouses up to overflowing, and here comes the famine. And I find it interesting. I think something that needs to be a perspective that we need to keep here is that food was a very precious commodity at that point when the famine showed up. Egypt didn't give it away. They sold it. They even sold it to their own people. So Egypt was becoming very prosperous and was very powerful at this point because of the management, the way they managed the food. All right. They're managing the food just the way God told Joseph to manage the food. So, you would think, because they took some of the food from the harvest of the people that worked and stored it, and so they weren't about to give it out back to them. They used it to leverage their position and authority. They became very wealthy and powerful. Egypt was the place. All right, so Joseph is second in command. Here comes Joseph's brothers. They come down and come before him. They don't recognize him because Joseph looks like an Egyptian now, and ask him for food. And we know the story. Joseph sells them food. He dealt very harshly with them. He sells them food, and on the way back, they discover that one of the sacks had the money in it. They get back to Canaan, where Jacob was, and they find out all the sacks have money in them. And of course, they had to leave Simeon behind. Now, something that's also very interesting to me is Jacob's reaction to the brothers getting back home and Simeon isn't with them. We see when the brothers didn't bring Joseph back home with them from the time that he was out in the field and they sold him, Jacob's reaction is very dramatic. He mourns and mourns and can't be comforted, and is very, very upset about the loss of Joseph. Brothers come back without Simeon, and it's like, oh, we lost one. Well, we still got to eat more. Let's eat. Right. So, I mean, you can see the favoritism going on in that family. And I'm reminded that God uses imperfect people. Even at the point where, Jacob was kind of the patriarch of the Israelites at this point, of the Israelite race. He was not perfect, but God used him to do his will. All right. None of us are perfect, and that's not an excuse to listen to God and do what God has us to do. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to do wrong things, but God's got it all under control. He will keep those mistakes under control and keep them from harming his will and his purpose. But it is critical, that doesn't give us a free pass. It is critical for us to become more Christ-like every day and more in tune with God's will and his purpose for us, and make sure that we're better and better and have God reveal our faults and weaknesses in us. But we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. God will work with us and cause those to not be a problem. Okay, so the brothers come back, and they have food, and they consume all the food, and Jacob says, you better go back down there and get some more food. That's where we pick up with chapter 44. Can I get 44 up on the screen, please? There we go. We'll start with verse 1, probably go through about verse 5. Now Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house. Oh, this is right before the guys had been back in front of Joseph, went back down to Joseph with Benjamin this time. I need to get the story right here. Went back to Joseph with Benjamin this time. They get back there, and Joseph sees Benjamin, and this time, very interestingly, Joseph is kind to them. He invites them to his house. They have a big feast. They all get drunk. And I don't know if Joseph did or not, but it says their brothers did. They drank too much. But, they're obviously indulging in some of the best of Egypt. And Joseph is very kind to them. So the next morning they get up and they're going to go back home. Their donkeys get loaded up with food. And Joseph tells the steward of the house, picking up here on verse 1, fill the men's sack with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain. And they did as Joseph said. Now, the reason that is critical because, that silver cup denoted a position of authority and power. And, stealing that from somebody would be, from somebody in authority is an egregious error, is an egregious breaking of the law. All right, so the morning dawned, and the men were set on their way with their donkeys. There's the donkeys again, Ray. I love them donkeys, right? So they had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing that you have done. Let's go on to verse 6. When he caught up with them, he repeated those words to them. All right. There we go, 7. But they said to him, why does my Lord say such things? Far be it from us for your servants to do anything like that. And 8 too. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouth of our sacks. That was the last time. So why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves. Now that's a pretty radical statement. They were thinking, oh, there's no possible way we did this. So, I'm confident that we didn't. But that's a rash statement to make. Whoever got caught with the cup, they're going to die. They didn't really mean that. Now, somebody, again, last week, I think it may have been Mo, but I don't remember for sure, said, Joseph was messing with his brothers. But I think what Joseph, and I think that there's probably an element to that. But I think also what's going on here is Joseph is making his brothers feel the pain of dishonesty. Even though they weren't dishonest this time, he was making them feel the anxiety and the pain of being dishonest and being liars. The brothers said, hey, we're honest people, but they're not honest people. They've lived a lie with their father for many, many years. Joseph was teaching them a lesson. He was teaching. All right, verse 10. Very well then, he said, let it be as you say. Whoever is found with it shall become my slave, and the rest of you will be free from blame. Each of them quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Oh no. Oh no. The youngest one, the one that was now the subject of Jacob's favoritism and attention, and the one that Jacob said, if he doesn't come back, I'm going to die. All of a sudden, there was a commitment made that the one who had the cup would die. And here it is. It's Benjamin. Again, Joseph is making the brothers feel the pain of possibly depriving their father from one of his sons. If you look at the 8 brothers, when they sold Joseph into slavery, they go back to Jacob, fabricate a story, and there's absolutely no remorse or no concern about what they did to Jacob. They were just wanted to be rid of Joseph, and they were covering the evil deed that they did. They were lying to cover up their sin. All right. Well, you may get away with that for a while, lying to cover up your sin, but it's going to come back to haunt you. And Joseph was making sure that happened so the brothers understood how egregious lying was and what it does. He was going to make them feel the pain of his brother not going back to their father, the favored brother, the one that the father favored the most. The brothers were now going to feel that pain. They needed to learn this lesson too. Okay, so let's move on to 12 or 13 rather. At this, they tore their clothes. They loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. Now they're like, man, we got to go back and fix this. We got to figure out some way to fix this. This is a mess. This is a big time problem. Joseph was still in the house when Judah and his brothers came in. So Joseph hasn't left his own house. Judah and his brothers come in, and they throw themselves on the ground before him. There again is the fulfilling of the prophecy in the dream, right? His brothers are lying prostrate before him. Joseph said to them, "What is this you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find things out by divination?" Now, I read that scripture and I thought, whoa, wait a minute. Joseph talking about using divination, what's going on here? Joseph didn't say, if you read this carefully, Joseph doesn't say, I used divination. He said, don't you know that somebody like me can use divination to find this out? All right, he's like, guys, pay attention to authority. There's authority, you guys seem to disregard it, and I want you to pay attention to it. What can we say to my lord? Judah replied. Now, Judah's become the spokesperson. What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? Here's an extremely important statement. God has uncovered your servant's guilt. What guilt is God uncovering? They didn't steal the money. They didn't steal the cup. What guilt is God uncovering? Selling Joseph, exactly right, selling Joseph. And who's he uncovering it to? The brothers, yeah, the brothers. The brothers are suddenly realizing, man, we thought we pulled off the perfect crime. We thought we had this covered. Man, the chickens are coming home to roost. All right. We are now my Lord's slaves. We are ourselves and the one who was found to have the cup. Now, that is a very interesting statement to me, too. Right? Hey, we'll be your slaves now. We'll stay here and be your slaves. You know what? They didn't want to go home without Benjamin. They didn't want to see what would happen to Jacob when they came back without Benjamin. They were like, better to be here and be a slave and all of us be gone. And we don't know what will happen to our father, but we won't have to see it. They were copping out, is what they were doing. They were chickening out. They couldn't go home and face their father because everything, all the deception that they had weaved through all those years would be unraveled and unveiled. Joseph said, "Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back to your father." In peace, yeah, in peace. There we go, yeah, in peace. They were going to go back to their father, but not in peace, right? So again, Joseph is reinforcing the agony that they should feel for losing a brother, the remorse they should feel, and the pain they were putting on their father. All right, so go in peace. Yeah, go. Just leave your brother here and go in peace. And by the way, something I forgot to mention that was interesting was, when the brothers went back the first time from visiting Joseph, they had to leave Simeon behind. All right, and again, there was kind of no big deal. We left a brother behind, but and I think even the brothers were feeling that too. Hey, we left Simeon behind, but we got out of there. We got our food. We're good. And I think now the whole family is getting the perspective of the value of human life. Judah went up to him and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with my servant, though you are as equal to Pharaoh himself." Now, that's an indication that these guys are finally recognizing authority and the importance of being reverent to and respecting authority. My lord asked his servants, "Do you have a father or a brother?" And we answered and said, "We have an aged father. There is a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and only one of his mother's sons, and he is the only one of his mother's son left, and his father loves him." Now, isn't that interesting? Because they're his brother too. All right? But we have a situation where they're half brothers, and I have half brothers, and I have a full brother. And I will tell you that I am closer to my full brother because he's more like me than my half brothers. All right, that's the natural way things go in a family. That is why God designed the family to be one man, one woman, one lifetime. That's the way God designed the family. Now, I know that doesn't always happen, and I'm not trying to make anybody here feel guilty if you've been in a situation other than that, or if you're in a situation where you have a blended family and you're trying to get them together and get them to be a family. I don't want anybody to feel inferior because of that reason. But I'm telling you, God's original design is one man, one woman, one family, and you wind up with situations like this when you don't have that, where some family members feel closer to others, and some family members feel like somebody's being favored and somebody isn't. And that's not the way God designed it from the beginning. All right? So Judah continues, "Then you said to your servants, 'Bring him down to me so I can see him for myself.' And we said to my lord, 'The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, the father will die.' Now, obviously, that didn't happen because they brought Benjamin down and Jacob didn't die. But, Jacob is a bit of as I think it was Pastor Andy that said, he's a bit of a drama major, And so he had the boys convinced, at least he told the boys that, hey, if you take this kid away from me, I'm going to die. So, the boys, what could they do? They had no choice but to operate under those conditions. But you told your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again. They're passing the buck a little bit. Well, we didn't want to bring him with us, and he wouldn't be in this mess, but you told us we have to do it. That's kind of what I get from that statement. When we went back to your servant, my father, we told him what my Lord had said. Then our father said, go back and buy us a little more food. Hey, I'm getting hungry. Go back and get me a little more food. But we said, we cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us will we go. We cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. So, finally they're kind of laying things out to Jacob and saying, here's the reality. All right, they're being truthful with Jacob, something that it seems they kind of lacked from the time we see their interaction with Joseph. Your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. Now, if I was one of the brothers, other than Joseph or Jacob, I'd be like, hello, yeah, what am I, chopped liver? One of them went away from me, and I said, he has surely been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. That's Jacob saying, one of the brothers went away from me and was torn to pieces by a wild animal. All right, now, what a perfect opportunity for the brothers to go, Dad, maybe we have something we need to talk about. All right, but they still don't own up to that yet. We'll see as we go on. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery. Now, I don't think that's Jacob being overly dramatic at this point. I think, Jacob is older, and if he loses Benjamin, the rest of his days will be sorrowful. Because, again, we see the favoritism there of he loved Benjamin so much because Benjamin was Rachel's son. So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back, to your servant my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servant will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. Now, maybe they're trying to leverage Jacob's drama a little bit to get Joseph to relent. Hey, it's going to kill our father if we don't go back with us. You got to let us go back with the kid. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all of my life. Now, that's an interesting twist for Judah, for one of the brothers, because they didn't bring Joseph back, and they weren't too worried about bearing the blame. They would lie to cover it up. Now, at least they're being willing to be responsible and say, hey, I will bear the blame for what happens to Judah. All right. So now then, please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. Now, Judah is willing to give up his own position in the family, and so we see Judah learning from this experience. We see him developing a sense of responsibility and maturity. He's like, hey, something went wrong, and we got to be responsible for it. The buck stops here. I'll be responsible for it. But I can't do to my father what will happen if Benjamin doesn't go back. So what Joseph was trying to do with his brothers, at least in this case, what we see so far with Judah, is working. They're learning from the importance and the value of human life and what it means to, and how it hurts others. Their own selfish desires were why they sold Joseph into slavery. They didn't care about what would happen to their father. They knew he was the favorite, and they knew his father would be upset. They didn't care. They just wanted rid of Joseph. They were trying to fulfill their own selfish desires. They're beginning to understand, hey, when we do that, it costs other people. And Judah's demonstrating that here. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No. Do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. So Judah is basically pleading with Joseph, please, let's come up with some other way to make this work. Judah is willing to do what it takes to make this work so his father doesn't get hurt. Yes. Yes. Yeah, we can see that Judah's heart is being changed. Absolutely. Absolutely. He's willing to be responsible for his actions. And in this case, it wasn't even his evil action or his sinful actions that were putting Benjamin in jeopardy, and he was willing to step up and be responsible for them. Because he had told his father, I will be responsible for this guy, no matter what. So yes, we're seeing maturity developing in Judah, and I'm assuming the other brothers too, to a certain degree. Then, wow, that's small. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before. Oh, we're at chapter 25 now. Joseph could no longer control himself before his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." Joseph is getting so emotional. And I think that's a combination of, hey, my brothers are here. I'm seeing a change in them. They're changing for the better. And Benjamin is here, who I haven't seen. There's a wellspring of emotion coming up in Joseph. And he knows there's about to be a great big hoedown reunion, and he doesn't want the servants to see that. So he says, "Get everybody out of my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him. Man, he must have really been crying. Right? I was raised in a house where, and this is primarily my dad said, boys and men don't cry. And that's the way he was raised. And we didn't cry. My dad would become very upset if we did. But here we see Joseph emotional and letting it out. Man, he's crying. There's an appropriate time to do that. This is an appropriate time to do that. Right? So all the Egyptians heard about it, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, here's the big reveal. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph." Now, can you imagine the brothers? I mean, my first reaction would be, Joseph who? The Joseph that I know has to be dead, man. He was sold into slavery, and that can't be good. And interesting question here: is my father still living? Why would Joseph ask that question? I mean, Judah just went through a whole diatribe about how tough it would be for his father if he didn't go back with Benjamin. And Joseph goes, "Is my father still alive?" Why would Joseph ask that question? Yes. Wow. Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Did everybody hear that? And I'll paraphrase this, and if I don't get it exactly right, make sure. But he said it was to emphasize or highlight how much of a separation Joseph felt from his family for all those years. All right, that's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought of that. Yes. That's kind of what I got from it too. Dan said he still couldn't trust him. His brothers were still liars. I mean, the brothers had just said that their father had talked about how Joseph had been torn to pieces, and the brothers didn't correct him. He still sees them as liars. There is an important lesson here. All right, in business, one of the things we used to say is once a liar, always a liar. If I caught somebody working for me in a lie about something, I never trusted them. I always had to verify and confirm everything that they did or said. If a customer lied to me about something, I never trusted that customer anymore. Once a liar, always a liar. And if you lie about a little thing, you'll lie about big things. All right? So this is why lying is so evil and gets you into so much trouble, because you tell a lie, then you tell another lie to cover up the lie that you told, and it becomes a web. It keeps going on and on. Yes, Barb.
I was thinking that maybe it was just for him to help them realize that, yes, he really was Joseph. That's why he was asking, "Is my father still living?"
Yeah, I think that could be part of it too, because the brothers were still, still in disbelief. Because we see that right afterwards in the scripture, right afterwards. But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Right? They're like, "What is going on with this guy? Is he really Joseph?" And oh my goodness, if he is, he's a man in authority. We're done. Right? So there's spiritual application here too. When you confront, when you are living in sin, and you confront, Joseph is a type of Christ. And in his position of authority, he has the power to decide if they live or die. And these guys now know that they are incredibly guilty, and Joseph has the power and the authority to end their life. And nobody would think different of it if he did it. So they're terrified in his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. So he's really working hard to convince them, hey, it's me. And, only Joseph would know that he was sold into Egypt by his brothers, because they propagated this lie that, that was the story that was out about Joseph, at least among the circles they ran in. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. Now, that's a very interesting statement. And I think it's important for us to maybe delve into that for a second. On the surface, on first glance, you could say, well, God sold me into slavery and God allowed me to go, and God had me go into prison. I don't see it that way. I see God allowing those things to happen to prepare Joseph to be in the position that he was in. I don't think God caused it. Human nature caused it. Our sinful nature caused the brothers to hate Joseph and sell him into slavery. Our sinful nature caused people to own slaves. Potiphar's wife's sinful nature caused Joseph to be thrown into jail. God doesn't cause sinful things to happen or people to have sinful thoughts or actions, but he allows them to happen, and we'll use it. We'll see later we get onto Scripture. We're not going to hit it tonight, but later on Joseph says God uses those things. What was meant for evil, God uses for good. Yes. Yep. Yep. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, he had to send Joseph ahead to prepare for the family to come, because that's how they were going to be saved from the famine. So, and Joseph says that I went ahead of you to save lives. He says, and now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourself for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing or reaping. That's a long time for no farming to be going on. All right? But as we'll see later as we study Scriptures, the plan that Joseph had really filled up the storehouses in Egypt, and they had plenty there. People were coming from all over the known world to Egypt because they heard Egypt had food. And Egypt was able to sell them the food and still supply their entire population with what they needed. God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Very prophetic statement here. God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth. What he's saying is you will be the remnant of God's people, and it is critical that that this plan was executed so that I could save your lives. Excuse me, I'm sorry. That I could save your lives, and that the race would continue, the line through which the Messiah would come. I'm so sorry. This is allergy season, and I take lots of allergy pills, and it really dries my throat out. So he says, I preserve for you a remnant on earth to save your lives by a great deliverance. All right. See, there's a type of Christ there too. Christ saves us by a great deliverance. His crucifixion and the redeeming work that he did on the cross spares our eternal lives and gives us a great deliverance. So we're seeing a type of Christ in this story. So then it was not you that sent me here, but God. Again, God used the circumstances to send Joseph to Egypt to prepare him to be able to move up into second in command and do what needed to be done to spare the Jewish race. Yes. 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 Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Yes. 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 Yep. Oh, thank you so much, Ed. I really appreciate that. Yes, yes, very much so. I think that's very important. And again, I think that reinforces the fact that no matter what our situation is, no matter where we are, we don't have to give in to culture. We don't have to let it influence us. We can be in the culture, but not part of it. And as a matter of fact, we see that later on in New Testament scripture. We are to be salt and light in the world. It doesn't say withdraw from the world and hide from it, but we are to be salt and light in the world. All right. But this is a very, very powerful example and lesson in how that we cannot allow culture to influence us. We have to remain true to God. All right. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord over all of Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me. You, your children, your grandchildren, your flocks and your herds, all that you have. So Joseph is saying, hey man, it's good down here. Come on down. Excuse me, I got to grab a drink here just for a second. Excuse me. Try not to make noise when I set that down. Boy, that's a lot better. It says, I will provide for you there because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. Now, Joseph is saying, hey, man, the cost of food is going to go through the roof. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? All right? And you're gonna lose everything you have just keeping yourself alive. So come on down here and I'll take care of you. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin. Joseph is showing the same favoritism that Jacob did. But again, Benjamin is his full brother. That is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded to me in Egypt and about everything you have seen. And bring my father down here quickly. He throws his arm around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him weeping. What a beautiful reunion, huh? I love this part of the story. He hadn't seen his brother for years. And they're reunited and they're hugging and they're crying. Great story. And he kissed all his other brothers and wept over them. All right. So Benjamin goes first, because he's the full brother. But he accords his other brothers, his half-brothers, the same show of love and affection that he showed to Benjamin. There's a unity beginning to occur. There's Joseph is demonstrating forgiveness of their sins and really unifying the family, right? Which is what the redeeming work of Christ does, right? When we are forgiven of Christ, there's a redemption that comes on and a union with the body of Christ, right? And that's what's happening here. He kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterwards, his brothers talked with him. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all of his officials were pleased. Now, that tells you something about Pharaoh's perspective about Joseph. All right. Not only did Joseph interpret Pharaoh's dream, so he sees a strong spiritual power on Joseph, but Joseph managed Egypt so well through the wisdom that God gave him that Egypt was in a very, very wonderful, strong position because they had something that everybody else in the world wanted. Pharaoh knew that Egypt could not be in a better position, and it was because of Joseph. And so when something good happens to Joseph, the Pharaoh, the top guy, is happy too. What a good place to be in. God is blessing Joseph at this point, and by extension, the entire Israeli race. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Tell your brothers, do this. Load your camels and return to Canaan, from the land of Canaan, or return to the land of Canaan, I'm sorry. Bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land." What a deal. Right? Pharaoh is saying, man, come on, leave what you have. I don't care what it is. Just leave it. Come down here, man. We got great houses for you. We got, the best donkeys for you. You're going to have all the food that you want. You get everything, man. It's going to be good. What a beautiful blessing. And this is all as a result of Joseph's faithfulness to God. God is now blessing him. Now, think about just a short time ago, Joseph sitting in a prison wondering if he's going to live or die. But he went through that, and now God is rewarding him for his faithfulness and blessing him. You are also directed to tell them, take some of the carts from Egypt to your children and your wives, and get your father and come. So he's like, not only you folks and your immediate, the immediate blood relatives, but the whole family. Bring them all down here. Don't worry about your belongings because the best of Egypt is all yours. Again, he's reinforcing you're going to be blessed because of what Joseph has done for us. So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them the carts as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. So they were set up that they could travel and have plenty. And to each one of them, he gave new clothing. Here comes favoritism again. But to Benjamin, he gave 300 shekels of silver. So he's like, here, man, you can stop at every sheets between here and Canaan. Get biggest MTO you want. And he also gave Benjamin 5 sets of clothes. Maybe he gave them all that money because he knew that they were going to need money and thought Benjamin's the most trustworthy out of all these guys. And this is what he sent to his father. 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt and 10 female donkeys. I wonder why there's a distinction there. I really wasn't able to find anything that told me why there was a distinction between the male and the female donkeys. Loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for his journey. Then I love this. Isn't this great? He said to his brothers when they were leaving, don't quarrel along the way. Did he know his brothers or what? All right. So they went out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. And they said, Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is a ruler of all Egypt. Jacob was stunned and did not believe them. Now, it's kind of funny to me that, they didn't worry about telling Jacob this. Jacob is an old man. They didn't worry about telling him this, but they were worried about telling him about Benjamin. I mean, you would think he'd be like, oh, it's the big one, Elizabeth. I'm coming to join you. Yeah. Oh, Rachel at this point. But anyway, when they told him everything Joseph had said, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of his father was revived. Right? Again, here's a type, we're seeing a type of the redemptive work of Christ. In his father, his spirit was revived because of the blessing of God that was going to be on their family, and knowing that his son was still alive. And it's interesting too. And Israel said, it's interesting that they don't call him Jacob in this verse, they call him Israel. Who has an idea as to why they change at this point and call him Israel instead of Jacob? Any thoughts on that at all? Say that again, because they're leaving their land? Yes. Because what is happening, they're leaving their land. And this is not just the redemption of, 9 brothers and a father and some wives and kids. This is the redemption of the race of Israel. This is the saving of the race. All Israel is going to be saved because of what Joseph is doing. So I think this is to indication or signify that this involves the entire race of Israel, the entire Israelite race. And Israel said, I'm convinced my son Joseph is still alive, and I will go see him before I die. Okay, folks, end of the chapter. I know we went kind of long, and we didn't have a lot of interaction. We had some. I really appreciate it. So I'm open for comments. Anybody have any comments about what we've talked about, or boy, y'all are really quiet. Do I see some? I see some hands back there. Let's go back there.
Okay, there we go. So reading chapter 44 and 45, we see Joseph completely emotional, so emotional that everybody in the entire household can hear him. We see Benjamin hugging his brother emotionally. We see his father emotional. I don't see his brothers emotional at any point in 2 chapters. The most emotional that the text shows is that they talked with him. After he was emotional, once he calmed down, they talked with him. That's it. In the verse that we just read, 24, Joseph says, don't quarrel on the way. So I looked up the Hebrew word, it's ragaz.
Okay.
Quarrel is like the 15th definition, like to fight is like the 15th definition of ragaz. It's don't be excited, don't be irritated, don't be hysterical. Everything I'm seeing in these 2 chapters, going back to the guilt, I'm not convinced necessarily that they're seeing a specific guilt in themselves for selling him into slavery. We know from previous chapters, multiple sins have been committed by the older brothers. Yep. There's almost certainly a sense of general guilt in the family and in the ancient world at this point that your sins will find you out. You'll be judged for your sins. Mm-hmm. I don't know, based on these 2 chapters, that the brothers have learned anything. And in a month and a half, when we get to chapter 50, or 2 weeks, whenever we get there, they come back to Joseph after Jacob dies and says, please don't take your anger out on us now that our father has passed. They don't get it, honestly. I don't think that they get it. They came and they went, and they were concerned about their own lives, their own livelihoods, and yeah, maybe it was slightly noble for Judah to offer himself in the place, but I think that was more out of respect for their father, more out of just a sense of trying not to hurt him further than necessarily a growth and a maturation and any kind of reconciliation with Joseph. I think they're just basically stunned at this point, and they haven't necessarily reconciled as a family. I know that kind of rocks the boat on the entire interpretation of these 2 chapters, but I'm just not sure if the brothers get it, to be honest.
That is an interesting perspective. I think there is an element of fact in there, and I think that you could very well be right. The brothers just don't seem like they fully come around the way Benjamin does. All right, so you could very well be right. There could be an element of that, but what I take away from that is that the Judah, we know the Messiah comes through Judah. So even through imperfect people comes the perfect redemption for our sin. All right, it's there and Joseph, being a type of Christ, it's there for the taking. All they have to do is accept it. He's made it very clear. He said to them, several times, don't blame yourselves. Don't feel guilty. It's there for the taking if they want it. So if they're not taking it, it's their own choice. So I think that's an interesting perspective. Yes. Do you have a mic? Do you have a mic? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll go, yeah.
Okay.
So let's put this to the test. When we all die, we all get to go to heaven, we get to see all of our loved ones. We're going to cry. I'll say, oh, I get to see Grandma and Aunt Marlene and stuff like that. I'm going to be pretty emotional and pretty happy. So there's going to be a little bit of crying up there. Let me ask a test question. Who is going to be crying the loudest when I step into heaven?
The Lord.
Jesus will run. John, you made it! Wow!
Wow.
I'm so happy that that's what's prophesied here when Joseph wept so loudly that he was not ashamed to have everybody hear it. And Jesus is going to jump off the throne and say, John, weep so loudly it's going to put everybody to shame that his
Hey, there you go. Yep. Yeah. Well, John, I think one of the reasons why Jesus will weep so loudly is not too many politicians make it to heaven.
Going off of
We know you're going, but So Tony, we have something for you.
going off of what
Hey,
John.
we're getting late. We're gonna wrap this up here pretty quickly, but I
going
want to
off-
make sure we get other. Oh, I'm sorry, we got one back there.
Yeah, going off what John said when
Yes.
like, there's a couple places where it said like for example when Joseph wept on Benjamin's shoulders. That's a Hebrew idiom, and that can be seen. And we miss a lot. And it goes to the very beginning of how loud he wept. He wept so loud that even Pharaoh's household. But the other place we can see that same Hebrew idiom is in the parable of the prodigal. And when the father runs to his son, what does it say? It says he caught his son after, he wept on his shoulder. And it goes to what John's saying, like, the Lord wept so loud, even though he can smell the stench of, like, the pig all over his son. He could smell it, and he still gave, like, the son all those, gave the signet ring. And we can see it here, like, how the Lord favors, like, even like Joseph and all that. And that's the God we serve. Like, he will run towards us, even though we are in the state of sin. Even though he says, like, he loved us while we were yet still sinning, he loved us first. And goes to, like, that's how much God does love us. And, like, going to what, like, Nathan was saying, there's people that are not going to accept that love and not going to repent, even if they see it, like, firsthand. And that's just the hardness of heart, And, like I said, like, that's how loving our God is. He still will run after those people who reject him. Like the prodigal was in a foreign nation, and it said the father was looking in that direction where he knew his son was. It's that hard. And it goes, the Lord uses a lot of his parables. He'll take from, again, like the Old Testament stories. He'll take them and he'll use those parables. Because again, he used stuff that his audience would understand. And there's two sons there. When after the son that stayed behind, he was so angry, like, why, like, you just had a feast for this guy that just wasted everything, who should have been dead, and you're having this feast? What about me? Yeah. You can hear this, like, the same, Joseph's brothers saying, like, what about me? Like, what did I get? And what did the father say in the prodigal story? He said, you guys always had this. This is yours. You just never realized, like, what you had.
That's an interesting point, and we're really getting late, and I want to try to wrap this up. But your point about how the prodigal son didn't have to clean up before the father offered him redemption. Joseph didn't say to his brother, hey, go confess to dad and make things right with dad and straighten yourselves out, then come back to me and I'll forgive you. Joseph offered it unconditionally. Yep. So I think that's a really critical point. Now listen, we need to wrap things up. And I'm old. It's past my bedtime. I see that light over there, and I want to start walking towards it, So I wake up stiff in the morning, and I'm afraid it's early onset rigor mortis setting in. You know how it is, right? So somebody told me I should do stand-up comedy, but it's too late because the hard part used to be comedy. All right, we're done. Hey, thank you so much. Let's end in a word of prayer, if we would. Ed, would you close us in prayer? Yep, here.